Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Efficiency and Consistency Through a Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. Presenting today is Theodore Love, Director of Technology for the Phoenix Central School District. His responsibilities include improving instructional practices, overseeing the district's data systems, and managing all technology programs, including resources, operations, budget, and staff. In his role as a school district leader, he has created an IT strategy that has resulted in a more efficient, agile, and responsive information technology team that continues to bring increasing value to the organization by supporting both classroom instruction and the operation and security of the school district. A former music teacher, he is passionate about transforming teaching and learning using technology. He has a bachelor's degree in philosophy from SUNY Potsdam, a master's degree in philosophy of education from the University of Toronto, and a certificate of advanced study in educational administration from SUNY Oswego. Ted is a VMware certified professional. We're pleased to have all of you join us this morning, so without further ado, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Ted and get things started. Ted, whenever you're ready, man.
Thanks, Jake. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us for the presentation on virtual desktops, which we also call VDI, and the case study that we're going to take a look at what we've done here in the Phoenix School District. So let's get started. As Jake mentioned, here's my information. He introduced me already, but if you'd like to connect with me after the presentation, please feel free. If you're local in the central New York area and would like to take a look at what we've done, sometimes actually coming out to the environment and seeing the school, seeing thin clients and virtual desktops in the data center, kind of make it real. So feel free to connect with me after the presentation, and I'd be happy to continue the conversation. So as we get started, let me review our objectives for today's presentation. We're kind of going to have three parts to it. The first part, just to cover our bases, we're going to spend a few minutes just discussing what VDI is. I'm sure many of you are already very familiar with the technology and the various products from the vendors associated with virtual desktops. However, I think it's good for all of us just to spend a few minutes at the beginning to talk about the technology that we call VDI. Then we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, which is talking about what we've done here in Phoenix over several years. We've been involved in VDI projects 3 different phases over 5 years, and I'm going to have a chance to share with you the various phases of the projects, what we learned as we moved forward, how we did it, share some experiences. Hopefully you can learn from that. The third and final question we're going to try to answer is what is the value of VDI? And I think this is the burning question that most of us have. We're going to do that by looking at specifically the business case for VDI here in Phoenix. So we're going to kind of relate that back to the case study. So let's get started with the first part. What is virtual desktop infrastructure, or what is VDI? We're talking about here specifically server-hosted virtual machines. So just like your VM environment that you're probably running for your virtual servers, it's the same hypervisor. It's still running on the same sort of infrastructure you would put in place for your virtual servers, except it has a desktop operating system. One key component to VDI is that you have some sort of management over those desktops. So that, the key difference between having a virtual server farm and a virtual desktop infrastructure is quantity. Many of us may run 10, 20 virtual servers on a single physical server. When it comes to desktops, we may be running 50 or 100 or 200 desktops on a single physical server, and have many physical servers in order to have several hundred or even 1,000 virtual desktops. To do that requires some management. One of the key pieces of technology that I'm going to talk a little bit about later is doing non-persistent desktops. That means that when the desktop is used by any individual in the organization, their session information, if you will, is not saved. There's no local data saved with that desktop. It's essentially destroyed upon log off and recreated. The other piece to that we're going to talk about, the other piece to non-persistent, is linked clones. The linked clone technology allows you to use less storage space by using the same image for the desktop, and then cloning that image out to the hundreds of desktops that you may be running in your infrastructure. So that key technology is non-persistent linked clones, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But if you can imagine, in order to do that, you need some sort of management over that allows you to maintain a single VM, we call ours the golden image, and make a change to that, and then provision a desktop pool from that golden image. The third bullet is just a quick discussion, about the difference between virtual desktops and a client hypervisor. Here, what I mean is, you take your laptop and you virtualize it. You run a VM on the laptop. There are also technologies by Microsoft and others out there that you could have a full desktop on your end user's desks and push a VM to that end user's desktop. So VDI is not that. What we're talking about is differentiated from that. And then the last bullet, versus server virtualization. We talked just a little bit about that, where when we virtualize our servers, that while the physical infrastructure may look the same, that we may be running ESX or Hyper-V or Citrix on the on the physical server, and have our storage and our compute resources allocated to that. VDI really takes sort of a dedicated team to look at how we're going to be able to support desktops in the desktop environment. While servers may sit idle most of the time and we're able to consolidate highly, desktop resources tend to have a different pattern of behavior, of use within your organization. One of the things that I'll share with you a little later as well is that, one thing that we learned is that in our organization, because we're a school, we have a lot of people logging off and logging on at the same time. The bell rings and students get up from class and they log off, and then, the next class comes in and maybe it's a lab or 3 labs next to each other, and now 90 students are logging in simultaneously. Your environment may be different than that. However, your desktop behavior, the behavior of those VMs, is going to be different than your servers. So it's just an important point to note at the outset. So this is one of my favorite slides, and I share this just because it's sort of the goal of VDI, and one of the reasons that we chose to go down this path. And the idea here is, if you look at sort of this layer, these sandwiches, that we can separate out the hardware layer from the operating system layer, from the application layer, from the user profile layer. And the idea is that if we could deconstruct the desktop, what typically is the physical desktop that sits on each employee or end user's desk, and replace it with the ability to make changes to the hardware or prevent failure to the hardware, make changes to the operating system, make changes to the applications independent from the operating system, or deploy new applications. And then as well, that user profile, everything from that user's, desktop background to their files and printers and all of the things that they've come to expect about their usability when they log onto their desktop. The really cool thing about this idea is that if we're able to really fully separate these things, we're able to then present that environment basically anywhere, anytime. Now, I'll share with you through our case study that, some of these you can be more successful with than others. But that being said, there are various products out there for you to take a look at to be more successful in, say, for example, user profiles or, for example, application virtualization. So to summarize, VDI was just simply the concept that we were going to take our 1,400 PCs across the entire school district, put them in the cloud, and that this idea was just brilliant. Our challenges, as we got started, we looked at the environment we had in front of us, and we had security challenges managing our desktops, maintaining the security on the endpoint, up-to-date antivirus, patching was a challenge for our organization at the time we began this process. Manageability, which kind of goes hand in hand with the security aspect. Being able to handle the changes that are needed, on a weekly basis, from updates, Java, Flash, application updates, supporting browsers and plugins, and especially as applications, rapid release on us. That was a significant challenge to our environment at the time, 5 years ago. Application sprawl. We took a quick inventory of the applications in our school buildings, and we identified over 200 apps in each building. And we just decided that the way we were doing this, was really the old school method. We were filing CDs. We were walking, copying onto a network share. We'd walk around from teacher station to teacher station, and the technician would literally install the software, clicking through the next dialogue until that teacher was set, and then would repeat the process across the hall for the next teacher. That made, doing changes to our environment very, very significant. My first summer, I asked the IT staff to image every PC in the district, and they looked at me like I'm crazy. What? We can't do that because of the work involved, because of the way they were doing it. Professional development seems to be an ongoing challenge, probably for all of us, particularly in the educational environment. We have a lot of folks who are not as comfortable with technology, not as comfortable with computer systems, so bringing them up to date, giving them the skills necessary, and ensuring that they can feel comfortable just understanding the computing environment. When we were a Novell environment and had separate domains, it was very confusing for people. Well, I can't log in this school, or I can't log in over here. How do I, have access to my resources? So through doing a very large network consolidation, moving from Novell to Microsoft and moving into VDI, one of our goals from the beginning has been to provide some consistency to that, so that whether a staff sits down at a thin client station or a desktop or is logging in remotely, they should have the same user experience. Lastly, we have a major printing challenge in schools, and I'd like to say we've solved it, but we are still very much a paper and pencil organization, and so a lot of things get printed, and managing printers is a big deal, specifically around the user's ability to find the printer that's in the lab or that's in that location. And you'll see a little later how we had some additional challenges and how we solved that with VDI. So those were our challenges, which fed into our goals. The goals for doing VDI were to centralize the management of our desktops. Of course, there are many different ways for you to manage your desktops. We now use SCCM and other Microsoft tools for our physical desktops. There are many third-party products as well that are great. However, as we looked at VDI, it seemed that the management aspect of maintaining a virtual desktop would be lighter and would be more efficient for us. So that was one of our goals, to centralize that management. Essentially, we're taking all of those desktop images that are spread throughout the building, and we're pulling them into the data center So our goal was, as we bring them into one central location, we'll be able to manage them. And so a criteria around evaluating solutions also was that management piece. The second goal was to reduce the footprint, having the lightweight end device. This was the move to thin clients. So the goal from the very beginning was to get full PCs, computing resources, out of the classrooms and labs. You can just imagine what these machines look like after they're used for 3 or 4 years with papers on desks, and as much as we try to get in and clean them and maintain them, you know, the moving parts, the spinning disks, just take a beating. So the idea here is let's reduce that and have a more efficient device, something with no moving parts, generates very little heat, is very easy to then just swap out and replace if there's a failure, so that we get that, that point of failure out of the classroom, and that we keep our technicians out of the classroom. Last goal was to consolidate and share computing resources. So as I mentioned, you know, we have all of these PCs that are, you know, in the classrooms, on the teachers' desks, in the computer labs. You know, if you walk by a row of computer labs, you see, you know, 25, 30 computers in every lab. Very quickly, you're up to 100 or more full computers. And the idea is that they're not all used at any one time. We looked at the number of users that were logged into our system compared to the number of desktops that we actually had. And we estimated at the outset that it was barely a third. So why are we providing those resources if they're really not needed? Not even at peak times were those computing resources needed. Well, we were providing them just because that was the distributed computing model. As we look at moving back towards a consolidated computing model, the goal was, how can we consolidate that so that if we only need so much RAM or so much storage or so much CPU power, that we consolidate that and share it, so that we're, you know, if we have 400 thin clients in a school building, but yet we only need 150 of them at any one time, I'm only running 150 virtual desktops. And first and foremost, our goal was driven by this, you know, gut feeling that when we looked at how we were managing our desktops 5 years ago, that there had to be a better way. I believed that. I convinced my staff that my goodness, the way we're going about this just did not make as much sense, and that there had to be a better way to go about managing desktops. Thinking about, oh, you know, if I just could maintain one image and deploy that out, spin that out to, you know, just provide the resources that I needed, was really an attractive solution. That being said, the other goal was to get out of this desktop life cycle. So, you know, a majority of our IT budget in schools was dedicated to just purchasing desktops year after year. And after we had done that enough years, many school districts realized we needed a replacement cycle. You know, so we would replace a building each year, or, you know, every 3, 4, or maybe 5 years, we would go through and replace the aging PCs. Those budgets were significant. The process for doing that were time-consuming, and really didn't make as much sense to be dedicating all of that effort, all of the resources, financial and personnel, to just doing the same thing. So that being said, we decided to make the leap. We started going down this road in 2009. It's hard to believe it's actually been 6 years at this point. But I'm going to sort of take you through the story, you know, our case study at this point. We began with the end in mind. So here's a picture of one of our classrooms. It is a business classroom at the high school. You can see there's the thin client environment. To the student, there's very little difference between what was there before and what is there now, except for the fact that our technicians don't have to go into this facility. The thin clients that you see there, the small devices, are stateless. They themselves have a management console. We ended up choosing to go with a thin client with an operating system. It gave us some benefits, so it runs a light version of Windows that allows us to manage and configure that through a central management console that the manufacturer provides. But other than significant updates that we might do every 6 months or 12 months, we really don't have to manage these devices. We can build them out with an image on a thumb drive or off the network, and we pretty much treat them like hot swappable units. So if one of these thin clients fails, we just pull one off the desk. We've got another one on the shelf. We plug it in, and it's good to go. I'll show you another picture. Here's the high school library a few years ago. This is when they were all wired up. Since then, the librarian has actually moved a lot of the desks, completely changed. Actually, he's done it twice since then, changed the environment so that it was more conducive to students working together in groups. But you get an idea here of what the computing environment looked like. So the most important thing that I think I can share from our experience doing VDI is that we approached this with an iterative evaluation cycle. As I mentioned, we implemented this in phases. We didn't just come in and virtualize every desktop across the district one summer and then move on. Instead, we slowly but surely we tested in a lab, we converted a building, we saw what that did, we switched some systems, we switched another building, we evaluated, we sought feedback. So each time we did a change, it allowed us the opportunity to evaluate that change. We would ask for feedback, and our teachers were great about working with us, being patient when things were not quite production ready. As a footnote, I have to tell you that because we're a school, we do have non-mission critical situations that we can use to test in production. This is a luxury that we have, and we took full advantage of that. So there were many times that we might take out of, say, 3 computer labs, we might take one of them and move them to the test environment and work with the teachers that were signing up to use that lab and let them know we're testing some things in this lab. Would you be willing to tolerate that and to give us some feedback to see how it works? So we learned a lot through that. There are times that we failed. We would put a system in. One of our first attempts at VMware View, we had a lab up and running, and the login time took so long that the class was just abandoned. They said, this isn't going to work for us, and the user experience was not there. So it made us realize, okay, we need to now concentrate on user experience. So let me talk through these highlighted bullets at the bottom. These are just a few of the evaluations that we had done. After the first year, so as I mentioned, we began with the end in mind. We put those thin clients out in the high school. We did not, however, run VDI in year 1. So while we had the thin clients in the high school and we were supporting them using another solution, we actually did a full-blown bake-off for VDI. We evaluated the Citrix solution, we evaluated the Microsoft solution, we evaluated the VMware solution. We worked with each vendor to have demo license keys cut. We spun up their environments, we ran them, we tested them, and that was incredibly beneficial for, number one, for our IT staff to be able to learn the technology, to learn the differentiator between the various products, as well as to know what the core of the technology really was and what we were going to need to do to be able to support that. The second is we did a complete evaluation around application virtualization. As I mentioned at the beginning, we sort of have that dream goal of separating these layers, right? The hardware from the OS, from the application, and that one seemed to be the key. OS to application, and if any of you have worked with that and tried that, you know it can be frustrating at times. Anyone who's tried to virtualize Office knows how difficult that can be. So we did a number of tests with application virtualization solutions, including, again, sort of all the big players, the Microsoft and VMware, as well as the third-party, various software providers out there. I will share with you, we ended up implementing AppV on the next slide over our terminal server, and we found some success with that. But it was very beneficial to go through the evaluations process there. The storage evaluation, which really took place because you can't just get storage arrays delivered to evaluate, really took place as we moved from initial implementation to production. So we have partnered with Dell and Terakai to do EqualLogic storage. The EqualLogic storage arrays have really come a long way, and from the very beginning where we were running with much slower capacity arrays to now where we're running with many more spindles, and we're running with SSD and hybrid arrays. We really learned a lot about what the necessity for the storage is based on our environment. And if there's one key piece that I'll recommend to you, it is that to take the time at the beginning to measure that, because if you're going to move day one into a production environment, that is a mission-critical piece, and if the storage does not perform, then your end users will notice a significant difference in their experience. And that leads right to the last bullet, which is the user experience evaluation. And that's just constantly asking our users, how did this work? Did it function within the lab? Are we able to deliver the applications? And this is something that we thought we would be able to do out of the box, maybe with just a roaming profile like we did on terminal server. For those of you who have done that, you know sort of the problems around roaming profile, bloat, and corruption. As we dealt with that, we looked at the other solutions with VMware and ended up partnering with Profile Unity to make sure that we could really dial in that user experience in a very precise way. So if we chose, okay, we want to be able to roam this folder within the application settings of, we want to store that on the network and inject that into the virtual desktop each time. So we spent a lot of time also evaluating user experience. Whoop, I'm sorry about that. So let me talk you through real quick the various phases that we went through. If you've heard me present on the topic before, you've probably heard bits and pieces of this, depending on when we spoke. The nice thing about looking at this 5 years later is that now we can sort of look back with more of a big picture approach. And when we get to that business case at the end, I'll share with you some information that will actually sort of provide that big picture for you. But real quick, the first phase, this was, as I said, 2009. We deployed 400 thin clients at the high school. We decided that was the way to go. At the time, we weren't really ready for VDI. You'll see the last bullet there says we tested VDI. It was very, very expensive and really not fully ready for production. So we ran the 400 thin clients on terminal server. Funny story, we actually just took 2 physical servers, virtualized them with Hyper-V at the time, and ran, I think it was 8 different terminal servers, load balanced them, and we were able to support the entire environment. Terminal server is now called RDS, as you know. That being said, that was not the best user experience when you're putting your users onto a server OS that, had some compatibility issues with some of our specific applications, as well as sort of that shared terminal environment, right? So, everyone had to have every printer because there really wasn't a way to customize the user experience. As I mentioned before, we also did App V in this stage. So we kind of took it from the standpoint of the first two that we virtualized, if you will, was really the hardware and the application. Second stage, we moved into the middle school. At this point, we did conclude our VDI testing. As I mentioned, we worked with all of the vendors. We chose to move forward with VMware. We put View in place for the entire campus. In this phase, we had issues around portability and printing. One of the things that we learned quickly, whether it was the VMware profile management or using Microsoft or roaming profile sort of thing, was that there really was no location-aware context filtering, so that when a user was, say, in Lab 131, I wanted to set Lab 131 printer as default because my users, you got to imagine, are 11-year-old kids and their teacher, they just hit the print icon at the top and they expect it to come out the printer that's sitting in the same room. It's a logical expectation. However, in order to deliver that was actually kind of technically tricky. The last piece, as I alluded to before, testing storage is paramount. This is where we learned that as our environment grew, our SAN IOPS, we would have these login storms, right? So everyone sits down at 8:08 and goes to log in. And what happens is, as I mentioned, we wanted the ultimate goal, which was the non-persistent linked clone. It was, from the beginning, I said, there's no way we're not doing anything else. Your other options are every user has their own desktop image. Well, what good is that if I now just have this collection of all of these desktops on my storage array? I wanted one single image to update. However, if 150 or 300 users are all reading from the same ones and zeros on your disks because you're doing this non-persistent linked clone, you can imagine what kind of IOPS storm that creates and what kind of bottleneck, both on your storage area network as well as just sizing the disks and sizing the array so it's able to handle that. So needless to say, we put some additional resources in place in the data center to be able to handle that. As we solved these issues and moved, from, as I'm sharing with you, sort of dabbling and learning to more project maturity or production ready, we were now able to take advantage of additional VDI benefits. So the lower network traffic, the PCOIP traffic, as well as all of the thin clients that we ordered in this stage, in the middle school stage, we got with Wi-Fi built in. So we were able to be very flexible and adaptable to meet the changing needs of our classroom environments. I'll share with you one quick story. We had classrooms, an additional classroom wing that was built on this building you're looking at here at the middle school, 25 brand new classrooms. But the computer labs were at the other end of the building. So I was working with the teachers in the new wing, and there was sort of a consensus that, wouldn't it be great if we had a computing lab, a resource out here for us to use so we don't have to take our kids all the way down there. By the time we walk all the way across the building, we lose instructional time. That's really valuable, so we just tend not to use it. One of my roles is to encourage our instructional staff to use our technology resources. So we identified a classroom that wasn't in use out in that wing. And what traditionally would have been a very complex project of rewiring and putting in power poles and a very large infrastructure to put in a computer lab ended up being one of the simplest projects we've done. We still had to put in some power because we don't have wireless power yet. However, we put in the power poles, and we didn't have to put in any additional network drops because we put the thin clients out in that computer lab. We configure them so they automatically connect on the Wi-Fi. And really the beautiful thing about running VDI over Wi-Fi, specifically with the VMware solution, is the PCOIP traffic is very light. So we literally ran a computer lab that was mostly wireless off of the virtual desktops in the data center that were connected through a single AP out in the hallway. So let's move to the third phase, and that's the elementary school. At this point, we were up and we're running and we're what I would call production ready. We had all of the issues in the data center solved at this point. We knew what we were doing. Our concerns around moving the elementary school to VDI were really about their applications. They tended to have more of the sort of 3D graphical game-like applications. So we did some testing. We felt that we were able to provide the solution that was going to make all of that work. The teachers loved it because they were able to put perhaps more thin clients than computers, on a desk, space efficiency, less heat, or in locations that they weren't able to prior. But really quickly, I want to tell you the story that happened that year. We ordered our thin clients for the elementary school, and about halfway through the summer we learned that there was going to be a significant delay because of problems in manufacturing. So we weren't able to get our thin clients like we usually get our summer orders probably first week in August, and then we have 3 or 4 weeks to get everything out in the school buildings and ready to open school for you guys. Well, at this point they were delayed. We weren't sure when they were going to be here. Turns out they're showing up like the week school is opening, during that first week. The really neat thing about having the VDI solution was that gave us the ability to have the entire infrastructure in place. So the virtual desktop pool for the elementary school was already configured, spun up, ready to go. Everything was, deployed, and once those thin clients came, all we had to do was unbox, put them on the network, give them a quick image update, and we were rolling. So we literally had one lab working within the first day. We had the rest of the labs working within the second day, and we had the entire building up and running in a week. So that can kind of show you what the speed or the scalability, if you will, to deploying VDI if you have all of your details taken care of in the data center. The endpoints can be really pretty simple. So to that point, I highly recommend that you plan and partner. And I throw this up there just because I think it's kind of funny as you look at, how simple, networking for the VDM server would be. No, it's very complicated, or can be complicated. Again, like with any significant project, planning from the very beginning, knowing how this is going to reside on your network, how it's going to interoperate with the other applications and the other things that you're supporting on your network is key. We partnered with Terakai, obviously, and worked with their engineers to do planning and implementation, and really did that in phases as well. So, we would work for, a week and do some planning, and then my team would do the implementing. Then maybe a Terakai engineer would come back, and we'd sit down and we'd review where we were at, where our pain points were, and what some next steps or best practices were for us. We had the luxury of implementing VDI just a few months before they were doing it in-house at Terakai. So the engineers were learning from us, we were learning from them as they were implementing for for us, for themselves, and since then as they've worked with other customers, you know, it's a great resource to bring them back and say, okay, now tell me what sort of things are you doing to optimize your golden image. There are some things, and I'm not going to go into a lot of technical details in this presentation today, but there are things that you should know about maintaining that golden image, that virtual desktop, where services don't need to be running. You know, we don't run antivirus on those because they're non-persistent. You don't want Windows updates running, you know, Java updates, things like that that could be consuming valuable resources in your data center or in your VDI infrastructure. Because you can imagine you do that one time and you spin that golden image out to 400 desktops that are running in the data center, and now they're all consuming that resource because, you know, they're identical clones. So here's a good example of you know, taking a look at your networking, why you would want to plan for how this is going to be implemented. We do have the VDM security server and everything poked through the firewall, so you can access our desktops from outside the network. That talks to the inside vSphere servers, and there are pieces that certainly deserve your attention prior to implementation. And as I mentioned, one of the big learning experiences for us was the focusing on the user experience. We learned early on that VDI could either be a disaster or could be a success story for the district. When we first implemented, there were many times where the experience was subpar. The users would clearly know, you know, thinking back to the days when we had thin clients and terminal servers, users knew that this was not a desktop computer. It was less than. So our goal doing VDI was to truly make the user experience as much as a physical desktop. At the end of the day, I wanted to be able to put a cardboard box over a physical PC and a thin client, have a user sit down at both and not be able to tell the difference. So that being said, some of the things that we learned, some of the, as you see the check mark bullets here on the screen, we had some increased login times. As I mentioned, everyone's logging at the same time. We start to solve some of those IOPS storms by throwing some additional storage resources at it. However, there's still you know, resources that you want to make available to that user, and if you're using your traditional group policy ways of you know, setting policies over the desktops, and you're having to do, you know, affect that policy has to take effect on every virtual desktop every time a user logs in. It really is not efficient. Your choices then are either abandon the policy, you know, or hard code or hard bake that into the golden image, the VM. Okay, I want every, you know, think for example, here's an example, printers. I could put every building printer for a school locally onto that golden image, so when a user logged in, they would just have the printers. But now they have a list of every printer in the building, right? And they hit the print button without looking at the print dialog, and who knows where it went. The flip side is, you know, I use something like group policy that then makes them sit there and wait while it goes, hey, I have to install print drivers. And again, because your group policy is not context aware from where the session is originating, you know, you could write a policy around the VM, but the VM's in the data center, and so is every other VM. So there were certainly some issues around that. The login times, the profile management issues, and the loss of the application flexibility. You know, if a user goes from their desktop to the lab, they sit down in the thin client, they expect things like, you know, whether it's a Chrome plugin or an Outlook signature or, you know, their desktop background, their preferences for this application or that. You know, we really didn't have a way to do that out of the box. So we had adopted Profile Unity, and we've done a little bit of work with FlexApp. If you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to check this out. We've worked with Terakai and Liquidware Labs to produce a white paper, and we did a webinar a few years ago to talk about that story as well. So check this out. The URL is down below, or you can just Google it, Liquidware Labs in the Phoenix School District, and you can read a little bit more about the challenges that we had specifically around the user profile and how we were able to use this product specifically to solve those. At the end of the day, we now run ProU on every PC, so whether it's a full desktop PC or a virtual desktop, and we use the same profile, for both of those. So when the user logs into when they use the thin client to log into the virtual desktop, ProU pulls their profile down and injects in whatever registry settings, files, shortcuts, network drive maps, printers. Thank goodness it was able to handle printers for us where it was context aware, so we could say, hey, if the PCOIP session originates from this lab or from this subnet, this is the default printer. And so we have more filter rules in ProU, I think, than any of their other customers, just because we needed to be very granular in our ability to deliver that. And at the end of the day, our goal was to make the user experience identical from physical PC to virtual desktop. There should be no difference. That being said, as I've mentioned, we still have physical PCs, and I would encourage you to take a read, to read this book. It's freely available by a blogger named Brian Madden. The book is called The VDI Delusion. It's really kind of a neat story. I was reading Brian's blogs when we were starting this 6 years ago. He was super excited. He's an old terminal server guy, and super excited about VDI and the technology that was going to allow us to virtualize all our desktops and transform our entire enterprise. And then it just didn't happen. And many of you are probably in the same boat. You're going, why didn't this technology really deliver on that promise? Take a read of his book. He's very intelligent, and I've got some quotes there for you to read. The first one where he says, look, we actually love VDI. What we don't like is when it gets a bad name because it fails. People try to use it for the wrong reasons. Make sure that you are intentional in how you go about your virtual desktop project, targeting certain areas. Make sure your use case makes sense. In our case, it was always testing. Test it before, evaluate it before we put it into production or as we put it into production. If you look at the bottom, there's a quote about, look, you're not going to replace 100% of your desktops. That is the case with us. I'll tell you right now, our environment is probably 80 to maybe 90% thin clients and virtual desktops. We still, though, have a need for full PCs, thick PCs, if you will, in the environment. We need them to support teaching. We need them to support multimedia. We need them to support offices that have legacy apps, specific cases. So take a look at that and make sure that you know that there are reasons to use it and reasons not to use it. So to wrap up from then to now, going back from 2009 to 2015, what do we look like? At the Phoenix School District, we have reduced our IT staff, not really out of choice. You've probably seen some things about funding in public education recently, but fact of the matter is we have less people to do more now. We've reduced equipment and supplies budget. We've increased the responsibilities. This may resonate with many of you. We've increased the number of teacher and student workstations, and we've reduced power consumption. So what effects did this have? I love this first bullet. Our desktop technicians became desktop architects. One of the really cool effects of virtualizing our desktops is it elevated the level of conversations we were having. We changed them from sneaker techs to data center, architects. the guys, instead of walking around and really just dealing with hardware failure and application failure, we're now designing that golden image so that the application would be interoperable with the other legacy app that required some old version of a framework of, you get the idea. So the conversations we were now having were much higher. The amount of resources and time that we're now putting into ensuring that the environment, the computing environment, is engineered in a way that is best optimized for the school is incredible. And we never had those sort of conversations before. Before it's break fix. And so that's the other two bullets really as well. The desktop management. Better desktop management benefits all desktops, and that's sort of a no-brainer, but hey, as they become desktop architects and have better ways to manage the desktops, your physical environment, your physical PCs will benefit as well. Last one is, this one is really cool. When we looked at the percentage of our trouble tickets, based on the time that the technicians spent on troubleshooting, we went from 30% to less than 10% over that 5-year period. So really a cool transformation, really a remarkable transformation in the environment from, technicians walking from desktop to desktop troubleshooting, why isn't this working, to, less than 10%, 7.5% of their time logged in our trouble ticket system doing troubleshooting. And that means that they now have times to do more developmental work, to do more professional development for themselves, to do more of those high-level conversations that I was talking about. So the last piece of the presentation, here we go, the business case for VDI. For the IT environment, for the IT team, it's that single OS for IT to support. It allows you to move to a service-oriented IT team. As I mentioned, we're now talking about, you get rid of some of that troubleshooting and that break fix. You're now concentrating on architecting and engineering that end-user experience. And more efficient management, having that pane of glass, the console for your technicians to manage and maintain all of the virtual desktops or virtual and physical. For users, it's to provide a better end-user experience. And the more work you do planning and pre-production and testing and evaluating in your environment, the better you're going to be able to meet this goal. And the last bullet, and I've got to put my caution sign up here. All right, so at the beginning when we started this, a lot of vendors said, look, you're going to reduce software licensing. Before you needed to license 1,000 copies of that software, now you're only running it on, 350 VMs, now you only need 350 licenses. I caution you on that, because a lot of the software vendors have already figured that out. And, when we went to renew licensing, they say, well, now concurrent licensing is X dollars, and you end up just about in the same place. Saving energy, yes, green is great, and we're saving energy for the school district. However, I've yet to hear of an IT department that gets that energy savings back into their budget. So while it's great for the organization and, for the taxpayers of the school district, again, the business case, I'm not sure it's the strongest argument, as well as saving money on expensive desktop replacement cycle. Yes, we do save money on that. However, server class hardware and your storage arrays are not cheap and, in fact, are more expensive than physical desktops. So let's jump right into that piece. This is a slide taken from the VMware tool. We worked with Terakai to do a complete TCO and ROI analysis based on our environment. We used very conservative figures, and this is probably what many of you have seen, or at least your gut tells you. Look at the first column. You see the investment dollars and the savings dollars, and in year one there is no savings. That's because, as we talked about, the investment in server class hardware is high. However, we make that investment once. You can look at here over a 5-year period. In our model, we actually had us replacing the server class hardware in year 5, so you see that's why where it drops down a little bit. But the cool thing is we're now past that year 4, year 5, and have really been able to see some of the benefits for doing that. Here's the total cost of ownership breakdown. So on the left you see the physical environment. Previously, our capital expenses were less, operating expenses higher. Virtualized capital expenses increase, operating expenses significantly decrease. So as I mentioned, let me go back one slide. You see this curve here where that savings doesn't occur to year 4. Here's where, 5 years later, looking back on this is really a neat perspective. This is the history of the GEA, the Gap Elimination Adjustment, which is the money that the governor has the state has withheld from Phoenix. So this is specifically our school district, and these are the dollars that were owed to the district by state law. This was, there's a formula written in law that says here's the amount of dollars per aid that you should be receiving. When the state was having some tough times, they said, you know what, we're just going to subtract some of that and keep it for ourselves so we can balance our own budget. It's called the Gap Elimination Adjustment. Check this out, folks. This is catastrophic. This is, we've been able to survive, but this is really probably one of the most significant impacts to public education we've seen in decades. Cumulatively, to our school district alone, the state funding has been withheld over $14 million, over those 6 years. And if we look at the big picture, here's statewide funding for schools. If you were to map out when we did our VDI project in 2009 and when we started realizing the savings, it really overlapped with this, this graph of state aid to schools almost perfectly. So we were able to survive that perfect storm, and it put us in a position now where we're not trying to catch up with expensive replacement cycles. We invested in 2009 in the VDI infrastructure. We built it out in 2010 and 2011, and as aid dropped off significantly in 2011, we were able to weather that storm and also be able to continue to move forward and provide that end user, the computing environment. Lastly, the ROI slide. If you want to see where that savings, they'll say, hey, you're going to save money doing VDI, where the savings actually lives. It's in the column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th from the left, infrastructure, administration, productivity. Basically what that's saying is it makes IT more efficient. I did not present this to my board and say, look, we can cut a lot of IT staff if we virtualize our environment. Instead, I knew we needed to absorb more responsibilities and be able to try to do so at a higher level of service to the organization. But that's where, if you go back a few slides, where we saw that reduced operating expenses going to VDI over 5 years really is in that, that column, right? So that's, you will see there's some client hardware savings, and there's some power and cooling savings as well. Those are the 2 other positive bar lines. But notice that you're spending significantly more on server class hardware, storage hardware, and networking. So that being said, how did we approach it? We took the opportunity to use that infrastructure administration productivity savings to develop IT agility. And that is, now we can do weekly image updates. On Friday, we take our golden image, we pack in whatever updates. We have a single person on staff who manages that. Before they leave Friday for the day, they recompose the desktop pool. It spins out 400, 500, 600 desktops, and off we go, using that non-persistent linked clone technology that we've talked about. I can't really stress this enough how awesome it is to be able to handle frequent software updates, Flash, Java, the whole 9 yards from the desktop environment. to be able to do it just once, and they hit the button and they roll it out. The last button here is we also have the option to put applications in the golden image or to virtualize. So while at the beginning of the presentation I showed you those layers and how ideal it would be to layer the hardware and to separate those layers, operating system, application, user experience, we have separated the user experience, we have separated the software. However, at the end of the day, as most of us probably know, that OS and application layers are really still pretty tightly intertwined. The nice thing about doing some application virtualization and some just application deployment, with the virtual infrastructure, we can just bake that into the golden image. We install Office right on the golden image. Other things we may deploy virtualized, but it gives us that option. So to conclude, and I think we're just about ending on time here, from the very beginning, we had our steadfast purpose, and I want to share this with you because, it really drove this project. We were passionate about this project. We worked through a number of learning experiences as we went, from really early adopters to VDI leaders. And that purpose, the reason we did any of this is that, we believe that IT teams could simultaneously meet and exceed these ever-increasing demands of our end users, which is a challenge enough, but to add something, to do so in a way that's simpler and more efficient to manage and maintain. And I think that's the key here, is that for us, we really believed that there had to be that better way, there had to be a simpler way, had to be a more efficient way, and we needed to make it manageable and maintainable, both financially and with the workflow for the IT team. So thanks for joining me today. I'm going to pass the presentation back over to Jake, and he'll take your questions. We'll remain on the line for a little bit, and thanks again.
All right, I actually have a question right now, Ted, so if you're willing to answer this one, I can send it over to you.
Yeah, I got it.
All right, excellent. So here's a question for you. When can I come and see your data center? I live in Phoenix.
Anytime. Well, not anytime. Reach out to me. Send me an email, tlove@phoenixcsd.org. I'd be happy to show you what we're doing. We're actually in the middle of upgrading our physical data center, so we're doing some cutovers this summer and going live in the fall with a brand new facility. Happy to show it to you. So reach out to me, make a time, and I can show you. I'm sure Tarakai would love for you to see some of the Cable Express products that we're using as well in the data center cutover. So come on out.
Oh, that's great. We know who asked that question. Thank you, Paul. So we can actually we can follow up with you on that one. And we have a question from Jerry. Was cost a deciding factor in going VDI?
That is a more difficult question to answer because it was more costly to go VDI than not. So the irony of doing a VDI project is that, as I showed that return on investment slide, there is no immediate, it takes more funds to do VDI, especially to do it properly from the very beginning. It's not until year 3, year 4 that there's any sort of savings. So our deciding factor really was just, there had to be a better way, that this solution was going to allow us to consolidate, that we were going to be able to reduce the footprint in the classroom. The thin clients seemed just like a perfect fit for our environment. So that was really the deciding factor. Cost did prohibit us from deploying a full-blown VDI solution year 1, and also cost made it so that we did the project in several stages, because to be able to fund the project entirely was just out of question. What I essentially did was I took our desktop replacement cycle budget and used that to invest in VDI. And because, as you saw, it's more expensive to do VDI from the very beginning, I wasn't able to do all of that, you know, wholesale from the very beginning. We had to do, you know, step by step by step. Did we have an idea that this was going to be more efficient from the beginning? Yes, absolutely. But as I mentioned in some of those slides, you know, the one with a caution mark there, did we really save, you know, we saved some money on power, I'm sure, but, you know, it's not like we saved a ton of money in licensing and in IT staff, and that, you know, going with this solution immediately solved any budget problems. We were lucky, our timing was perfect. We really made the right decisions at the right time to invest in VDI. So it's more like your retirement fund. It's an investment. It's a long-term goal. It's not a short-term project where you're going to look very quickly to reduce IT expenses.
I have another question that just came in for you, Ted.
Great.
This is from John. Were there or are there any applications that will not work with VDI, i.e. WebEx?
Yes, many. Testing is key. Depending on how you configure your, you know, again, we insisted that we did a golden image for the entire district. You could, from the very beginning, make a different design decision and say, do departmental-based images. I think that's what you guys have done at Terakai. Or you could say every user in the business office, for example, is going to have their own image. For us, that got away from the goal of consolidating and management, better management. So we really held strong to the belief that we needed one single image. So that being said, there are applications, you know, so here's the thing. Virtual Windows it's still Windows. It's running on virtual hardware. If we can support it with the prerequisites, we can run pretty much any application. Now, the question is, what is the usability of that application? I can give you an example. We do some screencasting here in the school district. We have some teachers that are creating videos doing flipped learning. So they create, say, a 5-minute lecture tutorial. They use some software to capture their screen and to record the audio narration so they can upload it to a website so the students can get the lecture anytime. Really cool. We have the software on the VDI pool. It mostly works. It's functional. However, if I were going to choose to produce a video, especially using, you know, recording my audio and screen, I would not do that from the VDI pool. So there are, you know, same thing, WebEx there. There are certain dependencies, and this is where that user environment or the personality or persona layer comes in. So there are certain applications and plugins that are just tricky to get to work in VDI. And if you're doing it and you've got one, feel free to reach out to me or to reach out to Terakai. Chances are we might have seen it, they might have already seen it. There may be workarounds, there may be ways to do it. You know, here's another example. I really wanted to virtualize vSphere because I didn't think that every user on the virtual desktop pool needed vSphere, but it would be really cool if the IT staff could have vSphere wherever they want. Well, vSphere has so many prereqs and, you know, the redistributable CPAC, and by the time we get all of that, you know, virtualized, or some things like those code-based packs, you know, such as your redistributable C++ from Microsoft, that can't be virtualized. So now you've got to bake that into the base image. So there are caveats to all of it, you know. Again, testing in your environment is key. In many cases, we would do things where I would just have a single user in a department or a building or a team try VDI before everyone else. Someone that I knew could tolerate it and use it, and then they would give us feedback. Hey, this works, but that doesn't work. So,
All right. Great. Thank you, Ted. And John responded, thank you. The response was perfect and what I expected. So appreciate you giving the time for the responses there, Ted.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. Well, that's all the questions we have. I just wanted to remind everybody we'll post an archived version of this presentation on our website in the next few days. You see the link there, terakai.com/webinars. So thanks, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Ted. Great presentation.